For the China and U.S. trade latest in Washington, D.C., Jeffrey Schott, Senior Fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics. In Washington, D.C. also, Arthur Dong, Professor at Georgetown University's McDonald School of Business. In Beijing, Liu Baocheng, Professor and Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics from University of International Business and Economics. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. When and under what occasions that the trade officials from both sides are going to meet is still unknown. But if that meeting takes place, what do you think should be the issues being discussed? Mr. Schott, can you give a short list?
Well, I think the list is going to be very short because there is no political pressure in Washington to change the existing agreement right now, and a lot of pressure to see the commitments that China made in terms of purchases of U.S. exports and reforms on investment in intellectual property policies to those reforms be implemented. There are some companies that want to see a relaxation of some of the tariffs, but politically it's very difficult for the new U.S. Trade Representative, Catherine Tai, to make any steps that would tend to back off what was done by the Trump administration. So I think the status quo is going to remain for some time.
Professor Dong, there were earlier expectations once the new administration, now not new anymore, but new administration came in, there might be improvement of relations, particularly on the trade front, because that's where the business interests are, but not much. Do you think the administration volunteers to tie their hands on this issue, or there's likely to be further space if there is any?
Thank you, Tian. That's a great question. I would agree with Jeff on this question of the Biden administration's policies as well as outlook for U.S.-China trade. I believe they're going to slow walk it. Certainly, for the first 100 days, President Biden had taken a across-the-board review of American supply chain. So that's certainly going to be one of the issues that comes up in their discussions with China. But I think it's going to be business as usual. There's a lot of momentum in terms of the residual impact of the trade negotiation that was undertaken by President Trump. And I don't see any sentiment whatsoever to make major changes moving forward.
Professor Liu, from China's perspective, what would be on that short list, if there is any?
Well, of course, the high expectation for China is that for the U.S. to bring up a sort of timetable to remove the tariff over the 370 billion of Chinese exports to the United States, now that the Phase 1 agreement is under active implementation. And also China is also open to work with the United States on the climate change issues and how to translate the climate change consideration into the bilateral trade. And in the meantime, China does want to communicate with the United States over the improvements China has made along the Phase 1 agreement, which is also in the interest of the Chinese development program.
When the trade representatives or officials from both sides might not necessarily going to agree upon things, particularly during the very first round, it is very interesting if I could brief all of you about the recent trip I made to Hainan, which is China's first ever International Consumer Products Expo in Hainan. Hainan is also the free trade port, the very first in China. The enthusiasm was extremely high. I noticed from the consumers, the media, the businesses. Mr. Schott, two things I want to share with you. First of all, businesses are telling me, both Chinese and non-Chinese, that they want certainty. That's not news, but they particularly emphasize now, because they do not know where is the limits and how they should adjust themselves beforehand about those limits. As posting has been shifting all the time. The other thing that they want to say is that they don't want to withdraw from the China market. They try to appeal to all circumstances to the extent that they can. Now, Mr. Shah, what would that mean to China-U.S. businesses in real terms, not just in political terms?
Well, both concerns of the business community are understandable, and the previous administration policy was very volatile, and that made it very difficult to plan. And even when you had new protection introduced, you didn't know whether it was going to go up one day or go down the next day, or how other types of policies were going to be imposed that would undercut investment strategies. I think under President Biden, there is a little more certainty that you are not going to have this volatile change from day to day or week to week or tweet to tweet. But you're also not going to have, I think, in the near term, a resolution or an amelioration of the trade friction when you are having ongoing and very severe frictions on the commercial side. And that's something that the diplomats have to be able to manage. The politicians have to be able to keep their cool and manage it as well.
I don't see much of management skills, in fact, from the U.S. side. China side, I'm going to ask the Professor Liu also, let's have more scrutiny as well. But Mr. Shah, if I could be a little bit more specific, I haven't seen efforts compared to the earlier times about how the new administration will really map out the plan. It seems to me, and many Chinese looking at what the U.S. is trying to do, is you got a crisis back at home. Now you are trying to, I'm not saying personally you, but rather the U.S. government is trying to make every effort to contain China, while at the same time is trying to fight the fire back at home because it cannot have a solution right now. But that does not solve the U.S. problem. That's the key. Meanwhile, if I could just share, the first few months of trade between China and the United States rise sharply compared to last year. Of course, last year was low, but this time it also means certain kind of momentum. The politicians are talking about one thing, but businesses are doing very different things. So, Mr. Shah, I'm really wondering whether we're going to have further divide in the United States because of the current policy that is not really interacting with the real issues that businesses are concerned.
I don't think so. I have to disagree with your conclusions, if not, though not with your analysis of the situation.
Go ahead.
I think there is a very strong bipartisan support in the United States for this restrictive policy vis-a-vis China.
But that's political, isn't it? The bipartisan thing, it's
political.
very political, right? What we are talking about now
Absolutely.
is the differences between the political side and the real business side. That's the issue. And the real consumer side, that is the issue. American families are paying more than $1,000 household every year in order to get more expensive product if they are not including Chinese products into the supply chain. That's going to make a huge difference.
Well, be careful about using studies from a year or two ago that don't take account of the changes that have taken place in supply chains since that study was done.
What's the
and
current
a lot
number
of Chinese
now?
companies.
What is the current number now, Mr. Shah?
Oh, I don't have it on the top of my head.
Okay, got it. All right.
But the real what has happened is that Chinese companies have begun to source to the United States from their foreign subsidiaries. Mm-hmm. And so you're still getting a lot of products, probably not as efficiently as if they were shipped from the original Chinese factory, but you're still getting a lot of products. So a lot of the inefficiencies or added costs are over time being reduced as businesses are adapting to the current restrictions. That's why they say they don't want the volatility and uncertainty, because they know what they're doing today and they can plan a way of doing it
That's
better.
right.
If suddenly there's a brand new set of restrictions put up on trade and investment, that would throw off the plans that they've made for these recalibrated supply chains.
Professor Liu, tell me more about how do you see the issue?
Mr. Shah talked about the sort of increased certainties over this Joe Biden administration. He got a point, but in the meantime, China is also facing a different type of uncertainty because with Trump, it's more like a one-on-one the trade competition. But now it seems that the Biden administration has changed this logic by teaming up with more of their trade allies, with more ideological consideration attached. And so that also injects a new type of uncertainty into the situation, and how the U.S., their labor interests can be taken into consideration. And there is also a strong rhetoric about climate change, but what is really the specific measures that can be brought up and also can be implementable between these two biggest economies over those climate change issues. And then also for infrastructure development, shall these two countries can work together also in consideration with the climate change. So that's also something uncertain. And lastly, I think now the U.S. administration, particularly now, they are listening more to the Congress. And while the Congress people, by the bipartisan type of consensus that they really wanted to corner whether Chinese companies investing overseas are really contributing to Chinese exports in different paths. So that's something they wanted to take into consideration. But so far, we do not really see any type of realistic measure that can be taken to contain such sort of move.
Professor Dong, it seems that both of the two earlier speakers suggest politics. Is politics the dominating factor now, influencing China-U.S. trade ties?
Absolutely, Tian. Politics is playing a huge role in terms of the speed and the degree to which the Biden administration is approaching U.S.-China trade at this moment. When you think about the Republican Party as well as the leadership of the Democratic Party, both are in agreement that for some communities within the United States, there's growing sentiment amongst the electorate that trade has not been good for everybody. Now, certainly, as alluded to by Professor, that certainly American consumers can get cheaper goods and more abundance, but there are certainly communities within the United States that have been affected by a job loss, as well as the hollowing out of their industrial base. And it was in those communities that most vocally voted for and supported President Trump in the 2016 election.
Right. How would the U.S. be able to do it while its own businesses' interests also involve so much in the innovation side?
Yes, I think with under President Biden, you're going to see a very, very direct and strong approach with regard to the transfer of technology. This is a carryover view from the Trump administration. And I think anything that touches upon national security will come under severe sort of scrutiny in the United States, as well as next generation technologies such as AI, cloud computing, autonomous vehicles and things of this sort. These are all areas, and biotechnology, these are all areas that are going to be scrutinized. And so they're going to resort to the toolkit that they used in the past several years, which is export controls, as well as examining what portions of our supply chain in the United States have become vulnerable as a result of COVID.
Professor Liu, that put China into a very interesting position, isn't it? But has China seen a clear message coming from the U.S. or clear lines of policies coming from the U.S.?
I think the situation is very clear that China has a good expectation that the renewed administration could really change some of the distorting policies by the Trump administration. But now there is a level of disappointment because when Joe Biden and Harris are seated in the White House, we do not really see any substantial move to improve the situation. And also, on the other hand, they they get very vocal in teaming up with allies in the European continent and also with the Japan, etc., and trying to build a sort of fortress against China. So that's the source of disappointment. And also for China itself, they are very determined to move forward with their own plan, and that's why they propose the double circulation, which is really, a contingency plan that if globally we encounter the restrictions, particularly headed by the United States, China can really run on its own wheel.
Let's just put China aside. What is exactly the U.S. now plan, if it is public information, to share with us, in terms of to improve its trade relations with others and also to really be competitive in the international market?
Well, the export controls are not a part of our competitiveness policy. They're part of our national security policy. And they are being reviewed because the export controls have been applied much too broadly. And there's I think, a interest in trying to find a more narrowly focused strategy that doesn't hit so much trade and investment, but only the areas that are deemed truly important for national security. So that's the one part of your answer. The second part of your answer, of the answer to your question, is the source of U.S. competitiveness will start with U.S. investment in the United States. And that's why President Biden is putting so much attention on his infrastructure plan. We have been deficient in investing in the United States, in the roads, in the transportation networks, in the waterways, the airports. There are so many things that can be done that will boost the competitiveness of the United States industries, of those producing in the United States, that will make them more competitive in dealing in foreign markets. So we have to do that first, and that's a big fight to get through Congress.
Professor Dong, it seems that both China and the United States have got their own plans. Mr. Shao just briefed us about the U.S. plan, China's plan also to increase the domestic consumption, as we earlier talked about the expos and the consumers' enthusiasm. Are we seeing much incentive and momentum to really work together at all?
Yes, I would agree again with Jeff and the statements that Jeff just made in terms of the priorities of the Biden administration. President Biden is certainly placing great emphasis in his first year on rebuilding and focusing on domestic U.S. policy, meaning the very large infrastructure bill that's being proposed, as well as the revitalization of America's industrial base. He wants to, in a sense, support those communities that have been left behind, focusing on social equity, economic equity, and environmental justice. And it does seem, in a sense, certainly will appear to China's policymakers that the Biden administration is slow walking the trade discussions. And I would certainly, I think I would agree to that. I would be cautious in terms of observing whether or not the United States is going to actually pull off a successful trade deal with China, simply because Trade Promotion Authority, which is a procedural requirement, that is up for renewal in June, and the Biden administration has given no indication whatsoever that they're interested in renewing it. So that's a necessary precondition to any trade deal, and it looks like that's going to lapse.
Very interesting, the situation. Professor Liu, what will be China's card prepared for the discussion?
Well, for China, because, as you said, that China is resolved to boost domestic consumption, so therefore the market appeal is always a very important political and economic card China used to play with any global diplomacy. Right or wrong, that's up to the debate. And the other is that China is now showing also its industrial might by having a very sophisticated industrial cluster, which cannot really be substituted by any other country, I should say, in a near and foreseeable term. And then
What is the cluster you're
thirdly,
talking about?
I mean, in terms of supply chain, China is having, all the industrial sectors that are integrated. For example, if you go to the Greater Bay Area, if you go to the Yangtze River area, and if you really want to set up a motorcycle plant within a week, you can have all the supplies ready. But this is not really available in any other country. And for the U.S. to bring jobs back, to have it reindustrialized, and that also takes a long time. And also whether the government is really on the same page with businesses in terms of their, business plan to make it more profitable. So that's something that brings a lot of uncertainty, and there has been a lot more political wishful thinking. But businesses always have their own way of, managing their own operation.
We'll see. Arthur Dong, Jeffrey Shaw, Liu Baocheng, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us. Really appreciate it.